What's up, Canes fans? Welcome to the Canes Insight Daily Podcast, powered by Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. We are talking transfer portal. We've been talking transfer portal. Yesterday, we talked about some of the big visitors this weekend. Now we got a visitor coming early next week, and it is the biggest visitor of all, at least literally, and that is Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackle out of Michigan State, highly coveted by Miami. We'll be talking about that recruitment, taking a look at the player. Also going to dive into a few other topics that are bubbling, making a lot of waves on the CanesInsight.com forums. One of them is the whole argument about, are we taking too many transfers? Are we not developing recruits? We'll dive into that and look at some stats as to what Miami is doing to build the best roster in the ACC. Also going to talk a little NFL draft. We'll get more into that as we get closer to the draft, which is on Thursday. But one topic I always like to talk about, where are players coming from? And is it Florida? Is it Texas? Is it California? I think you probably know the answer if you've been listening to this show enough or following the draft. But we'll talk about that. Before we get into all that, I want to talk about a firm that is always producing top talent, and that is Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, could be entitled to significant compensation, deal with the absolute best, who will handle your case from soup to nuts and know every step of the process. Take back control of your life with the pros in this field, Anijar and Levine. Okay, so listen, we talked yesterday about Damian Martinez, running back, visiting this weekend, number one player in the portal. Sam Brown, dynamic wide receiver from Houston, probably the best receiver in the portal right now. He's visiting this weekend. Talked about Jalen Alderman, linebacker, highly productive, visiting this weekend from Louisville. Diani Hill, corner from Marshall, Marshall's top corner last year, visiting this weekend. So some important needs, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And then Damian Martinez and Sam Brown, some dynamic guys at skill position. That defense still needs more. Really needs help at defensive tackle. You lost Jared Harrison Hunt. Again, we did an instant reaction pod for that. Tough loss, a player Miami was counting on to produce this year. How do they replace Jared Harrison Hunt? I said Miami expects to upgrade and wants to upgrade. One player that would be considered an upgrade, Michigan State defensive tackle Simeon Barrow. He is originally from Georgia. He is visiting early next week, first reported by 247. Shout out to Gabby. And we're going to break down his game. So let me bring in somebody who knows a lot about first-round NFL offensive linemen and linemen in general, Peter Ariz, to break down this defensive tackle. Pete, how you doing?
Doing well, D. This is, I think this would be a huge addition to the roster. Just looking at, we like to do these comparisons, right, to the next level, body type wise, production wise. You can kind of get a good sense of the type of player you're getting. Past doesn't always repeat itself, but I think looking at Simeon Barrow, I look at a guy in the draft this year, Jerzon Newton from Illinois, who has a chance, probably going to be a first-round pick here in a couple days. Guy that Miami actually had interest in the past. He's from St. Pete originally. But first of all, body types. Barrow came in at 6'2", about 290, 295, right? Newton, 6'2", 300 at the combine, and probably put on some good weight after the season as well. Newton, very twitchy, obviously, but you look at the production of both of these guys. Both of them going into their senior years, as Barrow's going into his senior year, now had 10.5 sacks going into now his final season of college football. Newton, same thing before he had this 7.5 sack season last year. And again, body types very similar. You get twitchy, you aren't getting these 6'5" space eaters necessarily, but the ability to get off the ball quickly, be disruptive in the backfield. That's what I saw from Barrow. And again, a guy who has been playing since freshman year as a true freshman in the trenches, right? So you don't see that at that position always. So you're getting a guy potentially, again, not just saying he's going to be a Hurricane 100%, but if you were to land him, you'd be getting a guy who's been very, very productive at this level already and slides in. I think he's a guy body type wise, probably a little bit bigger than Jared Harrison Hunt as well, who he would be coming in and sort of replacing there. But impressed by what I saw in some of the tape that we watched.
Yeah, let's dig into the file here. Like you said, 6'3", 290 now. He's about 6'2", 252 last time he was verified in high school. So someone who grew a lot, was a 4.44 shuttle verified in high school. So that's extreme quickness for a defensive tackle. Originally from Grovetown, Georgia, the Augusta area. Just visited LSU. LSU feels they have a very good shot at Barrow, but if he's coming to Miami, he's in the game. Miami's ready to make an aggressive pitch to him. Watching his high school tapes, some notes I noticed, and then I also watched him against Minnesota, which we both watched, Pete, that game film that's on YouTube. Very athletic. He could tackle in space. In high school, he played a lot of defensive end, played more inside at Michigan State. Very good laterally, always working, always using his hands, always just trying to find an edge on the offensive lineman. Not somebody who gets stuck on blocks. He is someone who's always working either with his hands, with his feet, with his overall activity. Likes to slip blocks. He's not a pure power player. He's going to be knocking people back, although he's not soft. I wouldn't call him a finesse player, but he's definitely an athletic player. He's not trying to just plug you up or just knock you back and bully you. He's really similar to Hunt. I think probably a little better than him based on what I've seen. But what could, use the Jerzon Newton comparison, guy that Miami recruited in Florida. I think it's a very apt comparison. I'll use a different comparison. Somebody who Cristobal recruited from Deerfield Beach in South Florida over to Oregon, 3-star player Brandon Dorless, who you'll hear a little later than Jerzon Newton this weekend, probably day 2. But either one of those would be an amazing result for the Miami Hurricanes if he could be anything like those guys. Just from the stats, 76 pressures in his career, 11.5 sacks, 18.5 tackles for loss, grades out on a strong run defender on Pro Football Focus. And I can tell you this direct, Miami has a sky-high grade on Barrow. They think he's a really, really good player. They're going to make an aggressive pitch. He has an opportunity to play, to be part of a very good team. Obviously, LSU is a great team, but we'll see if they take a step back without Jaden Daniels and without some of the guys that you're seeing in the draft. They usually are pretty good. They're going to have a good pitch, but I think Miami's going to be aggressive in going after Simeon Barrow. Anything you want to add, Pete?
No, I think that, look, you're looking at an age of college football, as we'll get into now in one of these next segments here, where everyone wants to see the freshman play, but at the same time, especially at this position, we're talking about defensive line, right? And we expect big things out of Justin Scott and Artavius Jones. But man, you're talking about something you mentioned is that he was 252 in high school, right? Continuing to get bigger, continuing to naturally fill out his body. He's going to be a grown man at that position, which is what this team is missing at that spot.
Masterful segue, Pete. That's why you're a pro. I wanted to talk about something that I saw on the message boards. Obviously, I'm always checking the CanesInsight.com message boards, the biggest, most active community of Canes fans on the planet, 6.8 million posts and counting. Always good topics being discussed. Something this morning that was being discussed pretty heavily and last night was bringing in all these transfers. Are we foregoing development of young players? Jalen Alderman was an example, the linebacker we talked about yesterday, a linebacker from Louisville. Miami signed some good linebackers. Are we just kind of ignoring those guys, bringing in a guy like Jalen Alderman, who's a starter for Louisville? He's going to come in and play a lot for the Miami Hurricanes. And, what I'll say is this. Number one, Miami is trying to win now. You can never forget, this is Cam Ward. This is year 3. We all agree the results have not been good enough the first 2 years. Cristobal agrees with that. There is a focus on winning the ACC this season. Who can help us win the ACC? When you take a Jalen Alderman, who's already a really good player on tape, who's already made plays against FSUs of the world, you know what he can do to help you win the ACC championship. So someone like that might jump to the front of the line. Simeon Barrow, you know what he can do against Big Ten offensive lines. He jumps to the front of the line. These are guys that are proven. They can help our defense right away, help our talented young guys, push our talented young guys, but contribute right away. But by bringing in guys like this, that doesn't mean you are foregoing development or that, Cristobal is suddenly like a Norvell that only uses the portal and doesn't develop young players. Peter, you have the tweet up. Miami was 3rd in the nation in freshman snaps this year. 3rd in the nation behind Clemson and South Carolina with that 2023 recruiting class. The 2022 class, yes, you've had some washouts. That was a transition class. Had some good players in that class as well that are going to be starters this year. Jaden Harris, Ines Cooper, Wesley Basaint, Isaiah Horton's going to play a big role. Some other guys, Matt McCoy will likely play a lot of snaps. So you had some players from that class, but you also had some washouts. Transition class, it happens. Bad injury to Travante Citizen. Things happen. 23, that class played more than pretty much anybody. You look at the stats we just showed you. 24 class, these guys are going to play a lot too. But you want to have guys that you could trust, that you know what you're getting on film, who are impact players to help you win the ACC, and have the freshmen be a bonus. If the freshmen beat out somebody or earn their way to the field, great. That's what you want. You want Ruben Baines. You want Francis Malinois. But you don't want to gift guys spots. That's not how you win the ACC championship. Big-time teams, Alabama, Clemson, the LSUs, Georgia, the teams that have won big, they've had true freshman starters on these championship teams. But you want them to earn that spot. You don't want it to be handed to them just because you didn't bring in enough players, experienced talent to make them earn it. And I think what Mario is doing in the portal is bringing in experienced players who are good, who can help us, not to plug holes, but guys that can help us win the ACC right now that have production. And if the young guys beat them out, great. If the young guys aren't ready, they'll have time to develop. But you cannot just say play the young guys and hope for the best. You need a plan. And to me, the plan is land blue chip players, play the ones that are ready, as you see from that stat that Pete put up, and then bring in guys like a Jalen Alderman who you can see on tape playing very well against the teams you need to beat right now. Because you only have Cam Ward for one season. Hopefully you'll replace him with someone just as good, but you don't know what the future holds. Let's win the ACC with this group. And the guys that are coming this weekend, Damian Martinez, he'll help you win right away. 2,000 yards over his first 2 seasons, 6.1 yards a carry, 228 pounds. He doesn't need to cook. He's ready to go. Sam Brown, 195 pounds. Honorable mention all Big 12 last year, 800 yards receiving with a bad quarterback. He's going to help Cam Ward immediately. Dione Hill. He'll jump into that cornerback room, ready to play, ready to cover guys, ready to tackle, knows the system. Jalen Alderman, we've already talked about. Simeon Barrow, who we talked about earlier today. He'll come in and either start or play a huge, huge role right off the top. These are guys that are going to help us win the ACC this year. You're still going to have the same talented freshmen coming in. Some will make it, some will leave. It is what it is. This is 2024. It's very much like a pro model. You don't have to forego young players to play portal guys. You can do both at the same time, and that is what Miami's doing. But Pete, want to switch to a topic that you're very familiar with, which is the NFL draft. We have the NFL draft coming up on Thursday. You've been there working it. I remember talking to you on draft day when your client Titus Howard was a first-round pick. So you've had a lot of experience with the draft recently. Pull up the stat here on which state produces the most NFL players. This is always a debate on the boards, topic of discussion. I am a Florida homer, but men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Past 10 years, Florida, 325 players in the draft, Texas, 289, California, 247, Georgia, 211. Even if you take away IMG, it's still a big lead for Florida. And I think it says a lot, Pete. So, just general thoughts on the draft, Florida players in the draft. What do you got for me?
I mean, I look at it and you see it across the board. You can find guys in any state who develop right over the course of 3-4 years in college. But we just talked about a guy in Drazon Newton who was 250 pounds coming out of high school, right, and now has put on all this weight. I think with Florida, because of the way that it is, where high school coaches aren't paid as much as some of these other states, such as Texas, California, Georgia, there's a lot of guys who are underdeveloped, maybe don't have the resources that they might have in some of these other states, right? Where we already know what the talent level is. We know what the competitive nature is down here. We know what the youth football level is down here. But there are a lot of those quote unquote diamonds in the rough who have not had the resources available to them, right? From a coaching standpoint, from a weight room standpoint, from a structure standpoint, whatever it may be, that once they get to that next level, they turn themselves, and then a lot of them still have the ceiling, right? That they can get drafted and they still are not a finished product once they get drafted and once they're in the league, right? So to me, that's a big part of the equation here. Not to say that the coaching in Florida isn't good, because guys still go to the next level and are playmakers and productive as freshmen. But I just think that when you're looking at these rankings, these 4 or 5-star rankings coming out, there's so many guys underneath that, right, who have the physical tools. they don't have the resources around them to get the most out of it at that point, that once they get to the next level and they have all of those things, they're able to blossom.
Yeah, you mentioned the development of guys. One name that jumps to mind from last year, Zay Flowers, who, by the way, played at University School across the street from our friends at Caneswear, Arrowhead Plaza, the absolute best in the business when it comes to Miami sports. You can get anything there. It's just a great place to hang out, talk to the staff, friendliest staff around, TVs everywhere. Just an awesome place with great places to eat around there as well. Caneswear and Davie. And if you're not in the area, caneswear.com. You see all the Caneswear gear around. We're fully stocked. Go to caneswear.com. Everything available, including Miami Dolphins stuff. If you're geared up for the draft, they have that as well at Caneswear. Again, across the street from where we saw Zay Flowers. But Zay Flowers is a guy who, in high school, 3-star player who was the least heralded of his 3 teammates, or the 3 players from university, him, Josh Sanguinetti, Kenny McIntosh. He was the least heralded, ended up being the best guy. Like you said, some of these guys develop later with the weight programs. And it's funny, one of the reasons I encourage people to go to CanesInsight.com forums is we talk about recruits more than anybody. And people always had their opinion. I have some opinions that I wish I could delete from the database, but I can't. And people could search them and throw them in my face when they come up. But when players get drafted, you go back and look. Zay Flowers was someone I did like. I thought he'd be a cornerback ultimately, like a nickel, super, instinctive corner. Ended up being a great receiver. Brandon Dorless, someone I liked a lot coming out. He was originally committed to Virginia Tech, basketball player. We had his high school coach on the board. Shout out to Coach Macho. And he was screaming. He goes, Miami needs to recruit this guy. Why are you recruiting Jalar Harley? Why are you recruiting all these guys from New York? You got this guy, Brandon Dorless, right here, who's better than all these guys. Turns out he was right. Brandon Dorless is going to be a day 2 pick out of Oregon. Mario signed him over there. He is now going to go pro as a very athletic defensive lineman. So, Newton's another one that was a guy Miami recruited briefly, ended up going to Illinois and becoming probably a 1st-round pick. So it's always fun to kind of go back and revisit those, because it goes the other way too. A guy like Leonard Taylor, I certainly was sky high in Leonard Taylor along with everybody else, right? From the time he was a sophomore, I thought he would be one of these guys shaking Goodell's hand today or tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday. Not the case, as we're going to find out, unfortunately, with his draft positioning. James Williams, I compared him to Isaiah Simmons. Probably a bad comparison. Probably more similar to a J-Ron Curse from Clemson now that it's all played out. So always fun to kind of see how these things develop. But Pete, I know you have some, different kind of memories on draft day, seeing these offensive linemen that you've recruited, seeing some of the younger players that you've recruited become NFL players. Cool thing. And we'll be talking a lot of draft in the future. But Miami fans, if you guys want to see Miami players shaking hands with Commissioner Goodell, if you want to see Miami players shaking his hand in the future, sign up for Canes Connection, Miami's official NIL collective. Use promo code CIS. You get 20% off. You get access to a private Zoom where I tell you about all these guys that are visiting this weekend. Those who are on the private Zoom know that they heard about all that stuff first on the Canes Connection Zoom call last Thursday. We'll be doing another Zoom call shortly with the absolute latest. 20% off. Use promo code CIS. But this is the way you could directly impact Miami's ability to get those guys who are shaking hands with Roger Goodell. Because for every Brandon Dorless and Jerzon Newton that are kind of sleepers, you have a bunch of other 5-stars that are pretty easy to spot that end up going straight to the 1st round of the draft, particularly at that defensive tackle position. Hopefully Justin Scott's the next one.
And D, it's interesting to me because we know that Mario is big game hunting, and we know that he's nationally recruiting, right? And we understand that he still wants to put the fence around the state of Florida. But an interesting trend over the next few years, the way the portal is going, is how many guys from Florida that go out to, like a Deani Hill, for example, right? From Gainesville, goes to Marshall, develops a bit over there, proves what he is, right? And now has an opportunity to jump and go to a bigger school. How much does Mario rely on portal guys who are originally from the state of Florida?
Well, look, who wouldn't want a Tyreek Stevenson, who was a 2nd-round pick last year, ended up being one of the better rookies in the league last year. Could have probably had more of him gotten more out of him the 1 year that Cristobal had him. Some issues, I think, communication-wise between the coordinator, defensive backs coach. We've gone over that stuff ad nauseum. But I think anybody would want a Tyreek Stevenson in their program with how physical he is, how talented he is. You see it in the NFL, right? So guys like that are going to be very useful for Miami. I think Florida State did a good job getting a guy like Marvin Jones, who I think will be able to be a good player for them. But there's going to be more guys like that come back home, particularly as Miami starts winning. Once Miami gets this thing rolling, everybody's going to want to be back in, both the guys coming out of high school and the guys that maybe had success elsewhere. So I think the key for this operation is get the team rolling. And then some of these Florida boys, your Devon Witherspoons at Illinois, just thinking of guys that left the state and ended up being great players. Maybe you get those guys to come home once you've proven that you can be an NFL factory.
Most definitely, man. And it's going to be interesting to see. Mario is a big weekend for him, because obviously they're trying to fill some of these needs, and looks like they have a really good opportunity to close the deal.
Looking forward to it. We'll do a lot more draft talk for the rest of the week, a lot more transfer talk. Right now, Simeon Barrow, circle him. Miami has a high grade on him. They need to bring him in. And if they do, this defense could go to another level. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Go Canes.